Hi, it's Marty again. If you are curious about this video's topic, the accidental misfiring of religion, and this is your first time watching one of my videos, I want to welcome you. I promise I'll do my best to make it worth your time. The information I'll be sharing regarding today's topic will certainly stir some deep thinking on your part. It sure did to me. Before I begin, I think you should know why I started this channel and why I'm doing these short videos. Once you know the why, you'll understand what I'm doing. Back in 2015, I had an experience that required me to read Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. I'm sure you recognize his name. He's the world-renowned atheist and evolutionary biologist who goes around the world trying to get converts to atheism. While reading his book, I found myself taking a lot of notes, and it soon turned into a manuscript for a book that I titled An Atheist Delusion, a Latter-day Saints perspective on atheist Richard Dawkins' anti-theist, anti-Christ book, The God Delusion. Once I published my book, I decided to set up this YouTube channel so I could do short videos on all of the arguments I cover in the book. It's turned into a series of videos now that I hope will counter Richard Dawkins' goal, which he wrote in his book, and he called it this. He said his purpose for his book was to make atheists out of all his readers. I tried to find it if there was any Latter-day Saint out there who had responded to Richard's book already, and I just couldn't find one, so I decided to step up and be counted, and I wrote An Atheist Delusion. I published it as a rebuttal to all of his arguments from my perspective as a Latter-day Saint theist who believes in the true and living God and why I do. This particular video you're watching right now is part 90 in the series of videos that I've done so far. So, with that said, let's pick it up where I left off last time. It was religion as a byproduct of something else. Let's go right to that. In this subtitle, Richard turns to his own view of the Darwinian survival value of religion. Richard said, quote, "I am one of an increasing number of biologists who see religion as a byproduct of something else." That's because Richard can't accept the idea that there is a true and living God, so it has to be something else that produces religion in the world, ubiquitously. It is the byproduct of biology or the product of revealed religion, possibly? Anyhow, I'm sure Richard doesn't claim to be an expert on religion, but if he does, he certainly doesn't understand it. Anyhow, Richard continues saying, "I believe that we who speculate about Darwinian survival value need to think byproduct," end quote. Then he continues a little later, "When we ask about the survival value of anything, we may be asking the wrong question," he says. "We need to rewrite the question in a more helpful way. Perhaps the feature we're interested in, the feature of religion in this case, doesn't have a direct survival value of its own, but is a byproduct of something else that does," end quote. This is going to get really interesting going forward, I promise you. I suggest that you pay close attention to what Richard says next. Richard gives the analogy about moths flying into a candle flame and asks, how could natural selection favor such an action by moths? Good question, Richard. Why indeed? My point is that we must rewrite the question, he says, before we can even attempt an intelligent answer. It isn't suicide, Richard says. Apparent suicide emerges as an inadvertent side effect of a byproduct of something else. A byproduct of what, he closes with. Richard then takes nearly a full page to describe how moths who were designed, what happened to who were evolved, who were designed, he says, to use the rays of light from the moon and stars to guide them while in flight, could be mistaking the light of a flame to be such a guide, and their biological nervous system's makeup, their makeup being DNA programming, ends up driving them to fly right square in the middle of the flame. This, to me, is a good description of how so many people are mistaking the loudest voice in the universe for the still small voice, and so it is driving them to fly right into the flames of Satan and spiritual death. It's a good analogy. Anyhow, it's a good metaphor. Richard continues, when the question is rephrased, the mystery evaporates, he said. It was never right to call it suicide. The flying into the flame of candles is a misfiring byproduct of a normally useful compass within the makeup of the moth, end quote. In other words, it was simply an accident, right? Richard then asks his readers to apply this byproduct lesson to religious behavior in humans. Listen to this. Richard says, we observe large numbers of people, by the millions, even the billions. In many areas, it almost amounts to 100%, he says, who hold beliefs that flatly contradict demonstrable scientific facts, as well as rival religions followed by others, end quote. Baffled, he says, we being atheists, ask why. But my point is that we may be asking the wrong question, Richard says. The religious behavior may be a misfiring, an unfortunate byproduct of an underlying psychological propensity. In other words, a mental illness, malfunction, or delusion. But what is the human equivalent to this unique guidance system, which is in other circumstances is or once was useful? On this view, the propensity that was naturally selected, he says, in our ancestors was not religion per se. It had some other benefit. I say, what benefit, Richard? And it only incidentally manifests itself as religious behavior. We shall understand religious behavior, ... only after we have renamed it. Oh, there you go. Wow. Talk about delusional remapping. Come on, man. If you're someone who believes this last statement by Richard, then you don't understand what Richard's trying to do here. Richard is saying we shall understand religious behavior only after we have renamed it. This is like someone renaming a cow pie and calling it a chocolate pie and then telling you bon appetit. Richard's playing a verbal word shell game with his readers. He continues this ridiculous shell game by saying, quote, if then religion is a byproduct of something else, what is that something else? What is the counterpart to the moth habit of navigating by celestial light compasses? What is the primitively advantageous trait, the result of the Darwinian rule that sometimes misfires to generate religion? Richard says, I am much more wedded to the general principle that the question should be properly put and if necessarily rewritten than I am to any particular answer, end quote. The main point of this subtitle was to degenerate the very idea of religion coming from God, saying that religion flatly contradicts demonstrable scientific facts, and that believing in the 8 examples of miracles performed by Jesus, healings, resurrection, etc., is ridiculous, he says. Richard then closes by saying this, what would an objective anthropologist coming fresh to this set of beliefs while on field work in Cambridge make of them? Them being the acts like raising the dead, giving sight to the blind, and Jesus' resurrection, as I said. Again, I see no argument value here in this examples of Richard that he's postulated, nor do they, in my opinion, in any way support the theory of God's non-existence. They just reflect Richard's disdain for the idea of God, his attributes, and any and all religions that may spring forth from this supposed false belief in God. I've replied to it only because I said I would give my perspective on Richard's atheist delusion and each of his God does not exist arguments, no matter how ridiculous or shallow some of them are, and this one was shallow. That's something that is inherited and natural selection caused? No, it's just a misfiring. When it doesn't fit his thoughts or how they go, it's a misfiring. And religion is a misfiring of natural selection. Come on, you got to be kidding. As I always say once in a while, good honk in the morning, Richard. Anyhow, that's the end of it. Any thoughts, any concerns, any questions? I'd love you to take a moment to go online and call that up and put in the comment chain what your feelings are or ask your questions, and I'll do my best to get to it quickly and answer back as soon as I can. But until next time, I wish you continued success. Goodbye.